an advisor to the Heritage Board. If Oslo is with us, best greetings to them as well. By way of introduction, I'd like to speak about what is the management plan of heritage areas that the Heritage Board is involved in right away. And in the second part, I'll speak about Lihula as well. A heritage management plan is a document that organizes the management of a heritage area. It is the new title for the Charter of a Heritage Area. It is a document that puts down the goals of a heritage area, its values, its borders, and protection category of the buildings, and exceptions and constraints. As I mentioned, the protection category of buildings is one of the new aspects and differences with the old regulation or the old charter, and therefore we are already able to point out the required or necessary constraints that apply for any specific building. And this protection category based on the value of a heritage area depends on how well that building corresponds to the goal of this area and how can this building be protected. And there is a package, an example of possible documents, the way they could perhaps or should look like. This is a very thorough document, and it's a lot more detailed than it was before. This protection category, it refers to the building being either it's a cultural monument or it has a role in maintaining the milieu or the picture, the outside look of this area. The values of heritage areas that I mentioned in the Heritage Management Plan. What do we want to maintain there? They have been the same since the beginning. Historians and heritage protection people have been wording these since 1970s. And if we are really generalizing and looking at it from long time distance, then most of Estonian heritage areas look very much the same, like Lihula. There is a medieval castle, and around that a settlement has developed. Protecting heritage areas, the principles of those, have been mostly focused on the older part of these towns. And this has been the case for decades in shaping or making decisions. What's considered valuable are usually buildings before the Second World War. In a situation where a heritage area was just created, it was probably justified. But today, we must work with buildings that have been created according to the very same requirements that were put down by the Heritage Foundation. There is no reason to believe that after what was created after the Second World War doesn't have any cultural value. Therefore, in the framework of setting up these management plans, it is possible and it's necessary to look at these heritage areas as a whole, look at the buildings that it has, and together with the local community, it should be revalued what it is that we are protecting, trying to link that with the local identity and what's extremely important for people to understand. Why do we need to set any constraints based on the heritage? Therefore, the Heritage Board set up public events while the management plan was created, and these public negotiations, we have a picture here from an event in Paide, where locals could have their say and their voice their opinions on work done so far. In the final phase, the document will be presented publicly to the local community when they still have an opportunity to have a say on it. In cooperation with local municipalities, we will also involve experts from different areas to adjust and amend it. Pärnu, Tartu, Kuressaare and Paide have taken that process furthest. This process is being initiated in Lihula. And as we look at the buildings of heritage protected areas and looking at the work we've done in Kuressaare, we can say that it is possible to find additional values and new aspects for these old towns, in addition to what was set in stone in 1970s. That's how we'll have new layers that perhaps have been overlooked, like, for example, this picture of Pärnu or a picture of Paide. Similarly, in this management plan, Kuressaare postmodernist heritage is mentioned as well as the old town of Tartu from the 21st century. Now let's come to Lihula. Everybody knows that Lihula, the historic city center or town center, is numerically smaller than Pärnu or Tartu. But it doesn't mean it would be boring or less entertaining. The task of a historian, it is said, to link the local to the cosmic. Built environment, culturally valuable buildings, fulfill that task equally well. They link the local, not only with the outer space, then at least with the European cultural narrative. What we see in the picture here are the ruins of a castle, or the link between this ruin and the conquerors from the west. The link is very obvious. And if that is not enough, we can see here German Gothics in the later forms. For example, the St. Elizabeth church from the 19th century. But that isn't all either, because Lihula has traces from important trends from the second half of the 20th century. And that is a postmodernist Kulttuurimaja, House of Culture, that where we are right now. And as we look at this building, of course we are reminded by Robert Venturi's slogan, "Less is a bore." few lamps, few pillars would just be boring. And right here in Lihula, there is everything. All the actually old houses, what this postmodernist masterpiece has loaned from. You have the rounded windows, red roofs, pillars. They all come from here. And many of these motifs that we see in Lihula are repeated from one building to the next. And it is characteristic to this area. Like in any other old town, we'll be seeing buildings, houses that created that reaction. A modernist apartment building. These are efficient living machines. Efficient machines for living. Yes, they have all the conveniences. There is living space for all, but they are nondescript. Because building them in historic settlements, in old towns, was one of the motives for the appreciation of old town zones that were created at that time. Soviet modernism wasn't created out of nothing. An example is a brick functionalism built in 1930s, the old schoolhouse in Lihula. And that built probably on buildings that were seen in Germany. As we come back to postmodernism, Lihula has a whole layer of the architecture of that area. According to the size of this place, which is about 13,000, the old post office or the telephone exchange, in its weird way, tries to blend in. This weird lining of a lining that uses roof slates. They have now been replaced with metal sheets, but of course the result is weird. But I believe in, and also this building that was created for the crafters of the national craft company Uku. And that's totally unique. It's located at the borders of Lihula, and it is weird, it's unique, it's different, and it's unique all over Estonia. All the examples that I chose are part of the picture of this city that has evolved over centuries, and they are definitely unique. They are one of a kind. Continuing along Johan Maiste's ideas. An ordinary building in Kuressaare, a classical proportions could be coming from an antique temple, or at least from the listed project from Tsar Imperial Russia's catalog for facades. And there are many buildings like that in Lihula. And this is a reference to antique buildings. That is very often possible only by admiring the ruins. And it was an important part of a person's education to take the grand tour of Europe. And you can say that a similar experience, admiring the fading beauty of historical glory, or the glory of the olden times. You can experience that in Lihula on Tallinna Road, which was St. Nicholas Church here. Lihula is grand. It's remarkable by these links. The material that you have here, the basis from which you can link the local identity to, there is a multitude of those in Lihula. Thank you.
Suur tänu. Väga sobivalt on 2 küsimust, 1 Liinale, kui sa saad siia.
There are 2 questions, one to Liina. Liina, what are the further possibilities for additional support? And Kaarel, how does the management order value, or how do you define value in that management document? Thank you for the question, but I don't have too good of an answer. If our program is successful, the more we speak about it, then it's more likely that we can continue that. That kind of an answer. Kaarel, can you give a longer answer? Although we've slightly run over time, but... So the question was, what is the meaning of value? What do you mean by value? I have a practical example from Paide. The working group that I mentioned had a question about the buildings from 1950s, the Stalinist era buildings. Experts felt they were interesting, but in the inventories they were never mentioned. It was not part of it because that was a traumatic part of the heritage, and they were not really valued until, at least not so far. And at that very same meeting, or that involvement meeting with the local community, there were several people who mentioned that the city sauna built in 1950s as a significant part of their experience in the old town of Paide. That's why I think it's very important to get input from people like that. Because it's locals in the end who need to maintain the value. They need to live with that value. Their role could be bigger. It is critical to access that information. Thank you. Thank you so much.